So, I ran out of time on the last video. They're going to be about 10 minutes long, so I'll need to time myself a little bit better. We were talking about how ATP releases myosin from the actin filament, and what we were talking about is how this is what causes cramps when you're running or whatever, because what happens is your muscles contract and then they can't release. And what causes pain is that you have these muscles constantly contracting. And your body senses this and then causes pain alerts in your brain to let you know that something wrong is going on. And the ATP, I just want to be clear, bonds to the little myosin head, preventing it from bonding to actin. And it also stores energy in there so that it can grab onto that actin when it is actually time to contract. So I'll move on past this and we will start talking about muscle fiber terminology. So we've talked about the sarcolemma a little bit. We talked about how that is the cell membrane of a muscle. Now I want you to be sure to know about the sarcoplasmic reticulum. And that is basically the endoplasmic reticulum for a muscle. But the really cool thing about the endoplasmic reticulum of a muscle, or the sarcoplasmic reticulum, is that it's the place where you have all of these proteins for pumping in calcium ions are placed. So they're really important for actually getting contraction of your muscles to happen. The sarcomere, these are all of those little contractile units, the myosin and actin fibers. Those are called sacromeres. So those are all packaged together into your muscle cell. And of course, we've already talked about the myosin and actin filaments quite in depth. So let's talk about the neuromuscular junction. This is where muscles and nerves meet. And here you can see your spinal cord coming down and you have your nerve running from your spinal cord. And what you have is that motor neuron comes in and it has many little dendrites, or end terminals, I should say. It has many little end terminals, and they're all spread out so that they can stimulate those contractile units, those sacromeres. And those motor neurons really tell those muscle fibers what to do and tell them when to contract and when to release. So here is what the neuromuscular junction looks like up close. So here we have our end terminal, and it's attached right at the top of our stack of muscle fibers, our little myofibrils. Remember those? Then, if you look down here, it looks just like a synaptic cleft, only instead of having another neuron on the other side of the cleft, we have a motor unit. We have our part of the myofibril that this little end terminal is going to be stimulating. And the neurotransmitter that is going to be released into the synaptic cleft here is actually acetylcholine. And the cool thing about acetylcholine is that it is found for contractile units of all types through all animals. It is one of the oldest ties between all animals on Earth. We even see sponges using acetylcholine to coordinate their water pumps as they pump water into their body to feed themselves. They use acetylcholine to coordinate those movements. So acetylcholine is the biggest tie to all life forms that we have. So remember the synaptic cleft. You should remember that from our nervous system unit. That is the space between either a muscle and a nerve or a nerve and a nerve. Remember, they don't actually touch. Then you have the motor unit, which is that muscle that the nerve stimulates. Then you have the acetylcholine. This is the neurotransmitter that stimulates muscles to contract. Please remember that. That will be on your test. You will need to know acetylcholine. And you will probably need to know that it's found in all animals, including sponges. Then we have acetylcholine esterase. Acetylcholine esterase is an enzyme found in the synaptic cleft between muscles and neurons, and it is a protein that breaks down acetylcholine. This is just a reminder of how your body uses cellular respiration to power itself. Remember that we start with glucose and we break that glucose down into pyruvate, and that pyruvic acid or pyruvate gets taken into our mitochondria. That's this thing here. And your mitochondria are going to produce water, some carbon dioxide, and some lovely ATP. And remember, ATP is the thing that allows us to detach our myosin and actin filaments from each other. So it's really important. And if we don't have that, then we have to use some different processes called anaerobic respiration or fermentation. And what happens is we take glucose and we break it into pyruvic acid, just like we always do, and produce some ATP. And then we take that pyruvic acid and we convert it into lactic acid. And that lactic acid, of course, is what prevents our bodies, that buildup of lactic acid and the lack of ATP is really what's causing those cramps. So, general muscle terminology. First, we have fascia. Fascia is a fibrous connective tissue. It is found all over your muscles. It holds muscle layers together. It holds muscles to your skin. It really is a really prevalent connective tissue, and we will be removing a lot of it to try and define and look for muscles. Aponeurosis is a connective sheet that usually connects two parts of muscles, and it is actually there to help the muscle move. It's very similar in texture and structure to fascia, but this one is actually more along the lines of actually helping the muscle to function as a contractile unit. Fascia is really more of a covering. Now, attachment points. We have origins and insertions. Origins are where a muscle begins, where it originates. And this is always at the less movable bone. And you always have to be thinking in terms of less movable and more movable, because you really have to think of bones as being either stationary or moving, because each movement that your body creates, there is one that's stationary and one that is moving. The insertion point is on the more movable bone, and this is always going to move towards the origin. That is how movement works. The insertion always moves to the origin, never the other way around. More movable is going to move to less movable. And if you think of like your arm bending at the elbow as flexing at the elbow, you can imagine your upper arm is not moving, but your lower arm is. It's being pulled towards your upper arm. So that's where your insertion is on your lower arm, and your origins are on the upper arm. So remember that less movable and more movable relationship. Now, types. You have prime movers, which are the muscles responsible for the majority of an action. And then you have synergists, which aid the prime movers. You have antagonists, which work in the opposite direction of the prime movers. And different muscles can act as prime movers or antagonists for different motions. Then you also have fixators, which are really help to stabilizing the joints. And then you have naming. And we'll get into naming in the next video. I'm going to run out of time again, so we will cover this in the next video. But make sure that you remember these muscle types, because you will have to be able to distinguish between prime movers, synergists, and antagonists.